So, the war in Ukraine, it's entered this really brutal new phase, a stalemate. But don't let that word fool you. This isn't some kind of pause in the fighting. It's a grinding, attritional conflict. In this explainer, we're going to break down all the key factors, what's happening on the battlefield, at the negotiating table, and on the world stage that have locked this war in place.
Okay, let's get right into it. The one concept you really have to understand to get what's happening right now is this. It's become a war of attrition. The strategy is no longer about these rapid, sweeping territorial gains. Nope, it's about outlasting the other guy. It's about wearing them down with just constant losses until one side literally can't fight anymore. So here's our game plan. We're going to start right there on the ground with the reality of the battlefield. Then we'll look at why peace efforts have gone nowhere. After that, we'll zoom out to see how the international players are involved. And finally, we'll pull it all together and ask that big question. Are we looking at a forever war? All right, first up, let's get our boots on the ground, so to speak. Years into this war, the fighting is still just incredibly intense, especially out in the eastern parts of Ukraine. Right now, the epicenter of all this fighting is focused on one city, Pokrovsk, in the Donetsk region. And this isn't just some random town. It's a major strategic hub, a gateway to the rest of the region. And that's exactly why Russian forces are throwing a massive amount of troops at it, trying to break through. And this really gives you the full picture of just how brutal this fight is. On the ground, you have this huge Russian force making these slow, painful, inch-by-inch gains. They're up against a really desperate Ukrainian defense, and the losses on both sides are just staggering. But the war has also spilled way beyond the front lines. Russia's ramping up its attacks on Ukraine's power grid, and in return, Ukraine is hitting back, targeting things like Russian oil refineries. What's happening on the battlefield has a massive ripple effect on any chance for peace. To really understand why this war just keeps going, we have to look at the diplomatic situation, which is, well, completely deadlocked. Both sides are miles apart.
And this slide, this just lays out the fundamental problem, the reason they're not even really talking. Ukraine and its allies are saying, okay, let's have a ceasefire first along the current front lines, and we can start from there. But Russia's response is a hard no. They're insisting that any talks have to begin with everyone accepting their territorial gains, full stop. And if you want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, just look at this quote from Russia's foreign minister. When he says Russia's legitimate interests, what he's really talking about is a set of demands that would basically be a full surrender for Ukraine. It makes any kind of real negotiation a total non-starter. So, what's the result of all this? Well, it means that any real high-level diplomacy is completely off the table, frozen solid. There was a proposed summit between the US and Russian presidents that got called off because it was just obvious that with Russia's hardline stance, the meeting would have gone absolutely nowhere.
Okay, so let's pull back from the direct conflict and look at the bigger picture, the global chessboard, if you will, because the actions of other major countries aren't just influencing this war, they're actively shaping the stalemate itself. Over in Europe, you're starting to hear some leaders say, look, what we're doing isn't enough to break this deadlock. So you're seeing new ideas being floated, like a potential European protection force, and a big debate about sending more powerful long-range weapons like Germany's Taurus missiles. The United States, meanwhile, is turning the screws on the economic side, hitting major Russian oil companies with new sanctions. But, and this is a big but, the military aid, which is absolutely critical for Ukraine, often gets caught up in domestic political debates, and that creates a lot of uncertainty. And then there's China. You really can't overstate how important China's role is here. Beijing is giving Moscow a vital economic and technical lifeline. We're talking about things like microchips that can be used in weapons. By doing this, China is basically blunting the impact of Western sanctions and, in effect, giving Russia the confidence to keep this war going. And here's another, frankly, disturbing sign of just how much this has become a meat grinder of a war. Russia is increasingly recruiting foreign fighters to fill its ranks. We're seeing reports of men being brought in from places like Nepal, Cuba, and all across Africa, often under false pretenses, just to be sent to the front lines. So we've looked at the fighting, the diplomacy, the international players. How does it all lock together to create this situation that feels, well, completely stuck? This table really does a great job of breaking it all down. Let's walk through it. Militarily, Russia's strategy is simple: attrition. They believe they can just outlast a Ukrainian military that has to rely on aid that's not always consistent. Diplomatically, that leads to an impossible situation where one side demands territory and the other demands a ceasefire. And economically, you've got Russia's massive state-funded war machine against a Ukrainian economy that is totally dependent on outside help.
It's a perfect storm for a stalemate. And all of this leads to a pretty scary possibility that people are starting to talk about seriously: a forever war. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean high-intensity fighting forever. It could mean a long, grinding, lower-level conflict that just goes on, which would effectively block Ukraine from ever getting the stability it needs to join the EU or NATO.
So that leaves us with the final critical question, doesn't it? As the cost in human lives and global stability just keeps climbing every single day, world leaders are desperately trying to figure out what on earth it would actually take to break this devastating deadlock.